Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Today, I'm your host, Nick Robin, and let's start off the show by congratulating Kevin Love for being voted the Most Improved Fit Award in the NBA by Bleacher Report. So I'm guessing that means he had shitty style, and now his style is not as shitty. That's usually what Most Improved means. It's usually the award you never want to actually get. I got the award when I was 10 years old playing baseball. I was actually very proud of it because I was a terrible, just awful baseball player to start the year. And at the end of the year, I wasn't as sucky. So we're now in month 7 of COVID, and goddamn, it really feels like things are never going to be the same again. People are slowly but surely going back to the office. Most companies I've spoken with and most of my friends I've talked to said they're not going back to the office until January of 2021 at the earliest, and more than likely that's going to be pushed into spring and even next summer. Yeah, 2020 is really none of our years. And it's funny, if you look at 2012, the Mayans predicted that it was going to be the end of the world, but I guess they were several years too early because 2020 really looks like it's going to be the end of the world. And let's just do a quick timeline of what's happened since 2020 started. So since 2020, we have had the Australian bushfires, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle quit the royal family, the COVID-19 pandemic, Kobe Bryant's death, the impeachment of President Donald Trump, the Parasite sweeps the Oscars, Harvey Weinstein verdict, the stock market crash, the Black Lives Matter protests, the Kim Jong-un death rumors, the Twitter hack, Jesselyn Maxwell's arrested, murder hornets arrive in the U.S., Kamala Harris chosen as a Democratic VP candidate, the West Coast wildfires, the recent death of Chadwick Boseman. So not a lot of good, some good, but not much good in 2020. But on the bright side, we're more than halfway done. We're almost 4 months away from 2021, and hopefully that will be our year. Now, moving on to today's show, I will be discussing the dramatic Game 1 between the Heat and Celtics, and who I believe has the upper hand moving forward. Next, I will look back at the Lakers' long journey to getting back to the Western Conference Finals, and on Nick's picks of top players that never reached their full potential. This could be for an assortment of reasons. Injury, I would say injury is probably the main one. They just didn't have it in them, and untimely circumstances. But first, a look at last night's Game 7, Clippers versus Nuggets. So the Nuggets became the first team in NBA history to come back from multiple 3-1 deficits in the same postseason. They came back from a 3-1 deficit in the first round against the Utah Jazz and completed the second one last night in less than dramatic fashion, winning 104-89. And yeah, I am in disbelief at what we witnessed this past week. They were up 3-1 3-1 in the series. Only 12 times in NBA history has a team come back from a 3-1 deficit. And three times now, it has happened to Coach Doc Rivers. It has to say something. You have to give credit to the Nuggets, but I don't know. This Clippers team had big expectations going into the season. They mortgaged nearly their entire future to put this team together. Jokic showed up, 16 points, 22 rebounds, 13 assists, 3 blocks, and 2 steals. Huge. He was the best player on a court, and typically in a Game 7, whoever has the best player on the court will win the game. And the Nuggets not only had the first best player, they probably had the second best player last night as well. Jamal Murray continued this insane run that he's had in the postseason, putting up 40 points, 15 of 26 from the field, 6 of 13 from outside, and for good measure added in 5 assists, 4 rebounds. And let's look at the numbers. In the regular season, he averaged 18.5 points per game on a respectable 45% from the field, 34.6% from 3. But in the postseason, those numbers have leaped to 27.1 points per game, and the efficiency has skyrocketed. 50.2% from the field and 49% from 3. That is insanity. That is ridiculous, the improvement he has made over the course of the regular season to the postseason, and by far, I don't think there's even an argument here that he has been the best point guard in the playoffs so far. That is definitely better than any of the point guards that are still available. Let's take a quick look. Boston, we have Kemba Walker, who has been struggling mightily lately, and we'll get into that in my next segment. The Lakers, I guess if you put LeBron in the point guard position, you take LeBron. But looking at their other options, Rondo has played great, but nowhere near the level that Murray has played at, especially the fact that Rondo has only played 4 games in the postseason thus far. There is no question that Jamal Murray has been the best point guard in this year's playoffs. And to top it all off, the Nuggets are now 6-0 this postseason when facing elimination. Outside of being down 3-0 in each series, you can't do any better than that. Let's look. Did the Clippers choke or did the Nuggets win? I'm going to say it's a combination of 2, but more leaning towards the Clippers choking. And the Clippers, they are the Clippers, after all, and they've proven that once again. The Nuggets faced a 13-point deficit with 1:25 left in the third quarter in Game 5, and a 19-point deficit in the third quarter of Game 6. They blew both leads, leading to Game 7, and it was brutal. It was a tough Game 7, and I don't know, does this change the way we look at Kawhi Leonard? I don't know if our view of Paul George has changed that much, but Kawhi Leonard is the guy who's known as being cool under pressure, coming through when it matters most in the clutch, and he hasn't lost a playoff series since, in 2017, they lost the playoff series to the Warriors. They should have won that first game. They were up 25 in that game 1 against the Warriors. Kawhi goes down. They end up getting swept. And, outside of that, I don't think Kawhi Leonard's lost a playoff series since 2016 that he has actually played in. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George combined to go 10 for 38, 4 of 18 from three-point land for a egregious 24 points. They totaled 24 points between Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Here's a stat that we really need to look at. Kawhi did not take a single free throw despite playing a game-high 44 minutes. It's Game 7. You got to be attacking the basket. You have to get those free points at the line. The fact that you had nada, is a huge question mark on how aggressive you're playing. The Clippers, as a team, shot 37.8% from the field and 25.7% from deep. And in the fourth quarter, it just got worse. When your best players are supposed to step up, they could not have looked any smaller. The Clippers started the fourth quarter by missing their first 11 field goals. In the quarter, Kawhi and George combined to go 0 for 11. They didn't even get a bucket in the fourth quarter. Typically, the team with the best player on the floor will win in a Game 7. And it wasn't Leonard, it wasn't George, it was Jokic and Murray. And when are we going to start giving the Nuggets their credit? They came out, they put themselves into another hole 3-1, but they dug themselves out of it once again and won 3 consecutive games with everything against their backs. You have to give them credit. They were the better team, and it's going to be interesting in this next series against the Lakers. Once again, they'll be the underdog. They like to play big. The Lakers just came back from playing small against the Rockets to see if they can readjust their game plan and their lineups. Be ready for Game 1 on Thursday night. So now let's take a look at the Clippers. And they're still the Clippers, a.k.a. they're cursed. After last night's loss, they have now completed 50 seasons with no conference finals appearances. They're at 50. The Hornets are at 30. And this is across all 4 major sports: NBA, NHL, NFL, and MLB. They have the title still as the worst franchise in professional sports. The fact that you've never made it to a Final Four in your entire existence as a franchise is unfathomable. 50 full years, 50 seasons, no Final Four. And not only have they never made the conference finals, this is the second time in 6 years that the Clippers have blown a 3-1 series lead. They are now 0-8 all-time with a chance to clinch a conference finals berth. After the game, Paul George had some comments about whether or not this is a win-now season for the Clippers. Start quote, "I think internally we always felt this was not a championship or bust year for us," end quote. Paul George, I'm going to have to disagree. You have to be in win-now mode now. There are no guarantees in the NBA, especially the way players flip-flop from team to team as they do nowadays. They traded the whole farm to acquire you, George. They don't control their own first-round pick until 2027. That's 7 years away. And George, you're not a young duckling anymore. You're in your late 20s, and same with Kawhi Leonard, and you guys have both dealt with extensive injuries throughout your career. And if we take a look at the remainder of the roster, the next 3 highest paid players, Marcus Morris, Patrick Beverley, and Lou Williams, are all in their 30s. Your window to win is now. Because again, there are no guarantees in this league. You were traded to the Clippers with only 2 guaranteed seasons left on your contract. Leonard signed a deal to match it. One of those seasons has now expired. If the Clippers don't win it all next season, you're in serious jeopardy of losing not one, but both of the superstars that you mortgaged your entire future for. Imagine that. Next year you don't win the title, Kawhi Leonard leaves, Paul George leaves. What are you left with? A bunch of somewhat overpaid role players. And don't look in your rearview mirror because you have the Warriors coming back, the Nets with KD and Kyrie, and Steve Nash, who wants to prove that it wasn't a white privilege move putting him in the position to be the next head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. And you got an emerging Dallas Mavericks team that took you to 6 games in the first round. I just feel like this entire year, this Clippers team, although they won the first 2 games against the Lakers in the regular season, they just never completely gelled. There was always something missing. They weren't the same team that took the Warriors to 6 games in the first round last year without Kawhi Leonard, without a Paul George. And I don't know what it was. There was just something missing. It must be a chemistry issue. We have reports coming out now that Marcus Morris and Paul George are barking at each other over a play in Game 2. Of course, these are the type of things that come out after you lose. If they had won, that report would have never came out. But now people want to point to these issues that happened throughout the series. But it's as simple as this. Kawhi Leonard, the best player, arguably the best player in the world, the reigning Finals MVP, did not show up when it mattered most in a Game 7. Same with Paul George. The reason you brought these 2 guys in is for games like this, a Game 7. Whether or not it be on a neutral court, you need to come in and be ready to play. You need to be driving to the basket, getting to the line. They did not do that last night. They did not come out with the same intensity as the Denver Nuggets did. And that's why the Denver Nuggets are moving on to the Western Conference Finals to face the LA Lakers, not the Clippers, as so many of us have predicted all year long. And now it's time to take a look at what we have to look forward to in the offseason for the Clippers. Marcus Morris and Montrezl Harrell will both be free agents. The Clippers are already way above the cap, so the unlikeliness of them even re-signing one of these players looks pretty dim. Lou will be 34 next year. Beverly will be 32. And to point out, has missed at least 10 games in all but one of his seasons in the league. They don't have much flexibility here. They have no trade assets. As we mentioned, they dealt most of those away to acquire Paul George. Next year, it's win now or blow up the team. Both players, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, are on the last year of their contracts. Whether or not they're going to re-sign for a team that failed twice to win the NBA championship could be unlikely. Looking at the front office, or more so the head coaching spot, should Doc Rivers be fired. He's been with the team now 7 years. He's had a great run of players: Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George. They've never won more than 57 games, which was in his first year with the team, and they've never made it out of the second round. He has a combined playoff record of 27-32. And as has been mentioned so many times already, this is the second time he's blown a 3-1 lead as head coach of the Clippers, and the third time in his coaching career, the first time coming in 2003 with the Orlando Magic. So think about that. 13 times has a team blown a 3-1 series lead, and he now accounts for 3 of them. And not only that, he's also blown 6 3-2 leads, including the 2010 NBA Finals when Boston took a 3-2 series lead against Kobe and the Lakers. And there were reports that came out last night that the players were so tired that they had to ask out of the game and could not play more than a 3-minute segment. Attributes to poor minute management, conditioning, discipline, and leadership. And this is supposed to be coming from a team that is the master of load management. Maybe it's time the Clippers do what all resets require. Start by resetting the person in charge. Likeable though they may be, the person who's underperformed, the person coaching the team itself, has to take the blame eventually. And Sam Cassell has been waiting patiently in the corner for years now. Maybe it's time he gets that first gig at an NBA head coaching position. Who knows? Maybe things will change. It's time to shake things up in LA. 7 years might be 7 years too long. And before we take a break, I want to look at Kawhi Leonard. Should he have stayed in Toronto? The team outperformed all expectations, had the second best record in the NBA, and maybe Kawhi Leonard performs best when it's just him as that number one option on the team. Knowing that it's all on him, he has no one else to shoulder the offensive load. And when the ball runs primarily through Kawhi Leonard, I think that's better for him and for the team. Yeah, if Kawhi had stayed in Toronto, more than likely they'd be in the Eastern Conference right now. They would have beaten a Celtics team that they took to 7 games without Kawhi Leonard, the former Finals MVP, and we'd be talking about Kawhi getting a second consecutive title. And how much would that mean for a team built the way Toronto is built with only one superstar, winning back-to-back titles in an era that is dominated by big threes and big twos? Kawhi Leonard, throughout his career, has gone against the norm. He didn't want to stay in San Antonio and be a part of a system ran by Greg Popovich. He had to go to Toronto. He made the best of a bleak situation, won a title, but then, for the first time in his career, he followed the crowd, brought Paul George with him to LA, and from the moment they stepped on the court together, things just never seem to gel that the way we all thought they would. And lastly, let's look at this from the perspective of what we would say about LeBron James. If LeBron James had gone 6 for 22 in a Game 7, he would be getting shat on all over social media. The guy does not get enough credit. He's made it whatever. He plays in the Eastern Conference for the majority of his career, but he's made the finals 9 out of the last 10 seasons. Kawhi Leonard, Paul George couldn't even make it out of the second round. The second round, a team that had expectations of making it to their first ever finals, could not even make it out of the second round. We're sitting here shitting on LeBron James for losing 6 finals in his career when Kawhi Leonard, yes, he has the 2 finals MVPs. One of them was as part of a juggernaut in San Antonio. The other one, we'll say he single-handedly was the driving force behind that Raptors team, which he was. But LeBron has been doing it now for 15 years. Realize how special a player like LeBron is. Enough about the Clippers and their playoff woes, whether or not they are cursed. After this commercial break, we will be going into the dramatic finish to the Game 1 Heat versus Celtics and who has the upper hand moving forward in this series right after this commercial break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
For the amount of drama that lacked in the Clippers-Nuggets game last night, it was made up for in the first game of the night, Game 1, Heat versus Celtics. And the Celtics came out hot, clinging to a large lead throughout the first half. But the Heat made it interesting down the line, coming back on numerous occasions. And Butler came up huge, as he has throughout the postseason. 20 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. And Dragic was huge, putting up 29 on 11 of 19 from the field, 3 of 6 from three-point land, 7 rebounds, 4 assists. Tatum had a great game as well, putting up 30 points, and Smart was unconscious, going 9 of 18 from the field for 26 points. I'm going to say we don't see that too often from Smart, especially moving forward in this series, but we'll have to wait and see. But the biggest moment of the game came from Bam Adebayo's block on Jason Tatum with 2.5 seconds left in the game. Since stats have been recorded from the 1976-77 season, there has never been a game-winning block in a postseason game to this magnitude. So it is already one of the most memorable blocks in NBA postseason history. Let's walk through it. With the Heat clinging to a 116-114 lead, Tatum drove baseline past Butler down the lane and went up for a ferocious dunk that would have sent the game into a second OT. Adebayo, though, who was watching the play from the opposite end of the paint, had a different plan. He came racing over, jumped up with his left arm, and blocked Tatum at the rim. Twitter went into a frenzy. Looking at some of the tweets, Magic Johnson, quote, Bam Adebayo's block on Jason Tatum's dunk attempt was the best defensive play I've ever seen in the playoffs! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Rudy Gobert, sticking up for the big men, Quote, big time block for the win. Yeah, size is still very important in basketball. End quote. Side remark at the small ball lineup over in Houston. And then my favorite tweet I found came from SoundCloud actor Ryan Phillip, who said, the Heat play like the team we thought the Sixers were going to beat. What an exciting game to begin this highly anticipated, highly even matchup between the Miami Heat and the Boston Celtics. Two teams that play very similar to each other. Both are great from shooting from the perimeter. Both have been excellent defensive teams, both in the regular season and in the postseason. The Celtics, before last night's game, were number 1 in points per game allowed. The Heat were number 2. And let's talk about some of the bets I put in on this game. So I went with the typical straight up on the series, took the Heat minus 115. And then my second bet. So there's this girl that I've been, let's just say that we're infatuated with since high school. Kind of looks like, if anyone's seen the show Degrassi, she looks like Manuela Santos, the kind of slutty character in the TV series that ends up getting pregnant at 15. And yeah, we don't need to go too much into that because I doubt anyone's seen Degrassi. The only thing anyone knows about the show Degrassi is that Drake was once in a wheelchair and on the show. She lived in Boston for the last several years. She's a big Boston homer for whatever reason. Not sure because she's from San Diego and Boston's super far away, but she loves the Pats, the Celtics, and I guess the Red Sox too. So I was out on Saturday, and I went to a little kickback at her friend Jackie's place, who we all went to high school with, and I told her I'd like to put up a bet, but since we're in COVID and we're both kind of struggling money-wise, I told her that we can do a bet that doesn't involve putting money down. I didn't say this to her when I was at the house because I didn't want to embarrass her in front of her friends, but I texted her saying, if the Heat win, all I want is a date, and if you win, I'll buy you some Celtics memorabilia. So either way, I am paying in the end, whether it's the memorabilia or taking her out to dinner, because, hey, I've been waiting a long time for this. So if the Heat win and if this girl agrees to go on a date with me, I'm throwing out the red carpet. Yeah, I'm throwing it all out there. It's not going to be some going to get or Applebee's or Chili's or any of those ratchet-ass places that you typically see people going on a first date on, which you probably never should because you're probably not getting a second date out of that. I have a lot invested, but I just have a really good feeling about this Heat team. So I was sweating last night in this game. Heat were making, had some bad luck early on, and I was like, holy shit, if I go down game 1, the percentages of me winning this bet drastically change. Luckily, the Heat kept on bringing back whatever the Celtics would throw at them. They were down numerous times. I think they were down as many as 14 in the fourth quarter. Luckily, Jimmy Buckets got it done. So let's look at some numbers I liked and numbers I didn't like from game 1. And the first number I liked, 44%. That is Miami's three-point percentage in game 1. Looking at the numbers, Miami had the second highest three-point percentage in the NBA during the regular season. Boston was second best at defending the three this season and best at defending the three in the postseason. Miami won out on this one. Great three-point shooting, won over great three-point defense. Moving on to what I don't like, 19. The number of shots it took Kemba Walker to get to 19 points. Very inefficient. He has not been himself lately. Been looking into that a little bit. He struggled mightily in game 1. He was 6 of 19 from the field, 1 of 9 from 3. That's not good at all. Over his last 3 games, he's 13 of 46 from the field. That's a good for 28% from the field, and he's 3 of 22 from outside. Miami simply used its strength and athleticism to force Walker into difficult shots. They threw Jay Crowder on him, Jimmy Buckets, Goran Dragic, just too much size for the 6'1", 6'2" Kemba Walker to handle. If the Celtics want any chance of winning this series, Kemba needs to get his shit together and get his shit together quickly. Back to the numbers I do like, 9. Tyler Hero's assists in game 1, a career high. And this guy has been just incredible. The 13th pick in this past year's draft, Tyler Hero has done everything to play above expectations. In the regular season, he shot a solid 39% from three, averaging 13.5 points, coming off the bench for a Miami Heat team that finished with the 5th best record in the Eastern Conference. And then in the playoffs, he's stepped his game up. He's averaged 14.4 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, and 4 assists for good measure, shooting 40% from three. So this guy's special, and again, he's only 20 years old and won't be 21 until this upcoming January. Pretty impressive for a guy that went 13th in the NBA draft at the end of the lottery. Now, lastly, something I didn't like, 48. That's a number of points allowed in the paint by the Celtics, nearly doubling their total of 26. If the Celtics want to get back into this series, Kemba Walker needs to step up, and they need to feed the paint a little more and be a little less obvious. Because if you're not scoring in the paint, if all you're doing is shooting from outside, it's just going to make you more one-dimensional, a little bit more predictable for the defense to know what you're going to do. And you don't want to be predictable against a team who's as tough on defense as this Miami Heat team has been throughout this season. And lastly, Jimmy Buckets came up clutch last night. Not only did he have the go-ahead three in the fourth quarter, he also had the game-winning three-point play in overtime to seal the win. And let's look at this signing from earlier last year. Jimmy Butler was in a toxic situation in Philadelphia, a team that wasn't able to space the floor in a style of play that he wanted. Pat Riley comes in, does the whole, throws the rings on the table. And I think guys like Pat Riley and Jimmy Butler are built similarly. They want to win. That's all they care about. They don't mind doing the dirty work. Look at Pat Riley's teams in New York. They were not the most talented, but they played the hardest, and they were willing to do the small things to win. And when Jimmy Butler chose Miami, people were like, why Miami? A team that did not make the playoffs last year, even with D-Wade's retirement tour. They didn't seem to have many assets around them. They had Bam Adebayo, who had a solid second season in the NBA, but outside of that, they had not much up to offer. But then the emergence of Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, the late signing of Andre Iguodala, Jay Crowder, who has always been, I think, very underrated and has been in bad situations throughout his career, one of them being in Cleveland. But coming here, knowing his role, has been a lights-out shooter himself. Jimmy Butler has put himself into that upper echelon of those top 10 players in the NBA, and I think people do not give him enough credit because he doesn't put up the super flashy numbers. I mean, this year he did average 26 and 6. His three-point shot was iffy, but he's boosted that percentage up in the playoffs. So it's incredible to watch a guy like Jimmy Butler, who you know cares so much and will do whatever it takes to win. He's a dog, and a lot of people did not like what he did in Minnesota when he held out of practice and came back and was barking at his teammates, but sometimes that's what you mean. He's got that Michael Jordan mentality. Moving forward, though, in this series, though, I'm going to have to give the upper edge to Boston. They came in hot last night, took a large lead, let it squander, but it took a lot from the Miami Heat, including a once-in-a-lifetime block to win Game 1. I see the Celtics coming out very strong next game, and with a coach like Brad Stevens, he's not going to allow his team to make the same mistakes twice. They're going to get better at defending the three. They're going to not make the same mistakes. Kemba Walker is going to pick it up eventually. Great players like him don't stay in slumps for too long. There you have it. I have Boston having the upper hand moving forward, although for my own selfish reasons, go Heat. After this commercial break, we'll be talking about the LA Lakers clinching their first Western Conference Finals appearance in 10 years and the journey that it took to get there, and whether or not their small ball lineup will be a part of their plans against the Nuggets in the next round.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
How exciting. We are less than 48 hours away from the Lakers' first Western Conference Finals game in over 10 years. Wow, 10 years ago? Let's see, 10 years ago, I was a rising junior in high school, or I was at the end of my sophomore year of high school. Wow, that is, whew. It really goes to show you gotta, when things like this happen, when your teams make these rounds, you got to cherish it because you don't know the next time it's going to happen. So the Lakers beat the Rockets 119-96 on Saturday to clinch a Western Conference Finals berth. LeBron is 37-10 all time in closeout games. Incredible. Averaging 28 points per game on nearly 48% from the field. The guy is just amazing. And then, as I pointed out, this is LeBron's 9th conference finals appearance, 11th overall in the past 10 years. I know I've been doing this a little too much, but again, just think about what we are witnessing here. It's not often you see a guy like LeBron who is able to just dominate in the postseason. Yes, I know he hasn't won the same amount of championships as a Michael Jordan, as a Magic Johnson, as a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But the fact that he can still go this deep in the playoffs year after year after year is just incredible. And here's another stat for you that is just mind-blowing. LeBron and Anthony Davis became the first teammates to average at least 25 points and 10 rebounds in a playoff series since 1961. And that was the St. Louis Hawks, who I don't think have been around for 30, 40 years now, with Bob Pettit and Cliff Hagan. Just incredible. And in that Game 5 win, they set a franchise record with 19 three-pointers. That's great and all, but I don't think that's as great of an accomplishment just because teams are shooting so many more threes than they ever have. So, of course, a lot of these three-point records that you see in postseason history are going to continue to fall. And that record would have been broken quicker if the Lakers had made the postseason once in the last 6 years, which they haven't. But it feels good to be back. And LeBron's quote after Game 5, I know what my name, my stature, and what I've done in this league comes with. Whenever I decide to join a franchise, either for starting off my first 7 years of Cleveland, my 4 years in Miami, going back to Cleveland 4 more years, and then coming into this franchise, I know what my name comes with, and it comes with winning, end quote. And that's what he's done outside of last season. Since LeBron has come to LA, they've done nothing but win, finishing the regular season with the best record in the Western Conference. And before we go any further in discussing the Lakers this season and their next round against the Denver Nuggets, let's look back at those memorable, and for most Lakers fans, unmemorable 10 years that led up to where they are now. Starting in 2012-13, Dwight Howard comes to the Lakers. There's that whole debacle. Chris Paul is supposed to tag along as well, but the trade was vetoed by then Commissioner David Stern. Steve Nash. Instead, we get Steve Nash. Plays only 50 games that year. 65 games over the total 2 seasons he was in LA. This led to Kobe playing way too minutes down the stretch as the Lakers, who we all thought were going to be title favorites, struggled to even make the playoffs in a tough Western Conference. They end up getting the ace seed, but without Kobe rupturing his left Achilles tendon. They play the Spurs in the first round. They get swept out of the playoffs. And that is the last time we see the Lakers in the postseason. And starting with the next year, 4 of the worst seasons in Lakers history from 2013 to 2017. 13-14, 55 losses, franchise high. 2014-15, they break that with a new franchise high of 61. 15-16, Kobe's last season, a franchise record for the 3rd consecutive year, 65 losses. And then next year after Kobe retires, 56 losses for good measure. This gets them into the lottery. They draft some great players, D'Angelo Russell, Brandon Ingram, Julius Randle, Jordan Clarkson, Lonzo Ball. But as we know, they'll all be shipped away to get Anthony Davis. In February 2017, Magic Johnson is hired as president of basketball operations as Jeannie Buss, the owner, has to fire her own brother. And then the trickle-down effect in March of that same year, Rob Pelinka, Kobe's former agent, is hired as the GM. July 2018, things start to turn around as LeBron James signs a 4-year deal with the Lakers, donning LeBron and the baby Lakers. But that doesn't last too long, as in that season, the Lakers miss the playoffs for a 6th consecutive year as LeBron suffers the first major injury of his career, the groin injury. He misses 17 consecutive games from late December to late January, and by the time he comes out, the Lakers have a lot of ground to make up, which they're unable to. Magic Johnson ends up quitting that year at the end of the season without even letting the organization know. And then the second big domino, July 2019, the Lakers trade Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, and 3 first-round picks, including that year's number 4 overall pick in 2019 for Anthony Davis. And that's where we are now. The Lakers will go on to get the number 1 seed, beating Portland 4-1 in the first round, and beating the Rockets similarly 4-1 in the second round. And now let's look at the Lakers small ball lineup, and will it come into play in the Western Conference Finals? So that small ball lineup consists of LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Danny Green, Markieff Morris, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. In Game 4 against the Rockets, that lineup was on the floor for 9 minutes, posting a moderate 100 offensive rating, a great defensive rating of 70.6, and a true shooting percentage of 50.6. Solid, but nothing spectacular. But in Game 5, for 14 minutes, their offensive rating with this lineup was 161.5. Their defensive rating stayed right around the same at 73.1, and their true shooting percentage, a ridiculous 86.8. Just incredible. They took what the Rockets were doing in terms of the small ball and did it even better. However, in this upcoming series against the Nuggets, a team that is very big up front with Jokic, Jeremy Grant, Paul Millsap, Jason Plumlee, I don't see the Lakers going as small as often, if ever, in this next series. But don't worry, the Lakers have JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard, who are well rested after playing very limited minutes in the last series against the Rockets. Will this time off, though, hurt or help the Lakers? After finishing their 8 seeding games, the Lakers had 3 days to prepare before facing the Blazers, as the Blazers had to play a play-in game against the Memphis Grizzlies, which they won. The Lakers then beat Portland in the first round in 5 games, before the Houston Rockets survived a 7-game series against OKC. Despite the extra rest before both series, the Lakers lost Game 1s in both rounds after the teams faced off elimination. So, I'm not sure if it's a benefit or not, but the benefits, though, getting your legs under you, regulating your sleeping patterns, and extra preparation for your matchup. However, the advantages of playing a full series, the extra time on the court to gel, and facing adversity only makes you better in the end. So the Lakers are about to go face a Nuggets team that has gone 14 games deep, the most you could play in the first 2 rounds or in any round. Going 7 against the Utah Jazz, going another 7 against the LA Clippers, and beating a Clippers team that a lot of us thought would be facing the Lakers in this round. Who's going to guard Jokic? You have JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard to throw out at them, but can they handle once he takes it to the perimeter? But on the other end, who's going to guard LeBron James? You can't put Jamal Murray on him. They have Jeremy Grant, they have Paul Millsap, but those guys aren't quick enough to handle LeBron. It's going to be an interesting matchup because the Lakers can go one of 2 ways. They can play small and they can play big. I'd say they're going to start off playing big and readjust depending on how their team reacts to what the Nuggets have been doing. But this is a team you don't want to give many chances to because, as we've seen, they can come back from big deficits as they did in both series. I'm going to go with the consensus here and say that the Lakers win in 5, maybe 6 games. But as we've seen from the Nuggets all postseason long, they can be unpredictable. Nevertheless, it's going to be an exciting series. It'll be interesting to see what the Lakers do with their lineups moving forward. I believe they'll start big to match with the Nuggets. If that doesn't work, they can always go small and outrun them. But tomorrow, Thursday, Lakers, Nuggets, the first Western Conference Finals game between 2 teams that faced off in 2009. Then it was Kobe versus Carmelo. And this time it's LeBron versus Jokic and Murray. Let's throw in AD there as well. It's going to be exciting as the Lakers continue to work towards their 17th NBA championship. After this commercial break, Knicks picks, and today we are looking at players for whatever reason did not meet their full potential, whether it was injury, whether it was a team fit, maybe alcohol or drug abuse. All of that and more after this break. Stay tuned for that.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
And we're back now on the GSMC Basketball Podcast, and time for my favorite segment. I hope it's yours too, and that is Knicks Picks. And today we are looking at the top 5 players that were never able to reach their pinnacle in their basketball careers for whatever reason that was. Could have been drugs, injuries, untimely deaths. And for most of these guys, we're just going to say, for most of these guys, it was injuries. And this is a long list of players to go through because there are so many great players that, for whatever reason, just were not able to reach their peak as a basketball player, such as Andrew Bynum, Stephen Marbury, Baron Davis, Andre Bargnani, Michael Beasley, Jonathan Bender, Sam Bowie, Sean Bradley. The list goes on and on. So it was tough to bring it down to just 5 names, but I think I did a great job here. So a lot of these players did have some success at the NBA level, but I think that there was more to these players' careers that unfortunately we never had the opportunity to see. So let us begin here with number 5 on my list, and one of the most eccentric players, I'd say, in NBA history, a great fro, and that is Bill Walton. And he was the poster child of those players such as Sam Bowie, Greg Oden, Yao Ming, Kevin McHale, and Larry Bird, who were very talented but gangly big men who apparently just put too much pressure on their lower bodies that did not allow them to play competitive basketball as long as they would have liked. Walton did win a championship in 1977 for a Portland franchise that was ravaged by injuries before claiming another title with the Boston Celtics in 1986. However, by that time, Walton had largely been relegated to cheering from the bench. In his prime, Walton was arguably the most skilled big man in the game. In 77, he dropped 19 points a game while also leading the league with 14 rebounds and 3 blocks per game. In 78, he even dished out 5 assists per game as a center, which at the time was unheard of. Think of him as a modern-day Nikola Jokic, but without the touch from outside. But who knows? He could have adapted in today's game. Walton never made it through a full 82-game season. He actually missed 3 entire seasons between 78 and 82, which would have been his prime years. He even sued the Portland doctors, who he thought weren't misdiagnosed him and were not as diligent when it came to his health. So number 5, Bill Walton. Moving on to number 4. And I would say for 90s kids, this is probably one of their favorite players from that era, Penny Hardaway. The name itself, Penny Hardaway. 6'7". NBA analysts were optimistic that Penny Hardaway would have been the next Magic Johnson. In 93, he was drafted by the Warriors, quickly swapped to Orlando for the draft rights to Chris Webber. And from there, Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal were set to become a great inside-out duo, similar to what Magic and Kareem were in the 80s. In his rookie season, Penny played all 82 games, putting up a solid stat line of 16 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists, helping Orlando to the playoffs. Next season, he upped that by averaging 21 a game, 4 rebounds while dishing out 7 assists, and even held his own against a post-baseball Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. The Magic actually would go on to beat the Bulls 4-2 in the 95 Eastern Conference semifinals. To note, that would be the last time Michael Jordan would lose a playoff series in his career with the Chicago Bulls. So that's something you got to think about there. Young Penny and young Shaq were able to beat the greatest player of all time. In Michael's defense, he was coming back from baseball and his body was not in basketball shape, as we saw in The Last Dance. However, Hakeem Olajuwon and the Rockets made easy work of the Magic, sweeping them in 4 games in the 95 finals. At the time, people were all in on Penny Hardaway and what this young Orlando team could do. In retrospect, though, the Penny-Shaq combo had already peaked. In 96, they faced the 72-10 Bulls, losing in a 4-game sweep in the Eastern Conference Finals. And from there, Hardaway's body began to fall apart. Shaq would go on to LA, where he'd win 3 consecutive titles with Kobe Bryant. And in 1997, Hardaway suffered a devastating knee injury that put him on the shelf for 63 games. The following year, at only age 27, he played in all 50 games of the strike-shortened season, but you could tell that he had clearly lost a step, averaging only 16 points a game on a miserable 42% from the field. Through time, various knee, foot, and back injuries began to pile up. His Orlando heyday was behind him, and over the next course of his career, he would be traded, benched, and waived by the likes of the Phoenix Suns, Miami Heat, and the historically dysfunctional New York Knicks. So, number 4, Penny Hardaway, and now number 3, Grant Hill. And at the time, Grant Hill was supposed to be that next Michael Jordan. He was the most complete player in the game. In 6 full seasons in Detroit, he he filled up the stat sheet, 22 points a game, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals. On the surface, it appeared that Grant Hill was improving each and every year in the league, averaging 26 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists through the 99-2000 season. He was able to do it all. He could defend on the perimeter, rip down a rebound, push the pace, open the floor, and finish at the rim. The league was salivating over a player of Hill's talent who was a clear-cut all-star and had the clean-cut image. But however, weak ankles proved to be his Achilles heel. In 2000, he played on an injured ankle late in the regular season, and through the losing end of a first-round playoff sweep, the Pistons ended up dealing him to Orlando the following offseason in exchange for Ben Wallace. With the Magic, Hill's ankle issues continued to flare up, and the once promising star remained sidelined for 292 out of the possible 492 regular season games for the team. In 2003, he underwent surgical procedure to actually refracture his ankle before realigning it with the leg bone. And from there, he showed that he had something left, averaging 20 points per game in the 2004-2005 season. He had to go and reinvent himself the rest of his career, becoming a solid rotation player for the Phoenix Suns later on in his career. And at age 36, played in all 82 regular season games while dropping 12 points a game. But there was so much more we expected from Grant Hill. He was going to be that Scottie Pippen 2.0, a better shooter, little less on the defensive side, and a better overall scorer. It's a shame that we couldn't see him at his full potential, because even from those early Duke years, we knew that we were watching something special. But unfortunate, the league was not able to see it at its full force. Number 3, Grant Hill, moving on, and probably one of the most heartbreaking stories of the last 10 years, and that is Derrick Rose, who reached the pinnacle of his career, winning the MVP in 2010-2011. In 2012 playoffs, though, he tore his left ACL. The Bulls lost the series. He was lost for that entire 2012-2013 season. And when he finally saw the floor again, he looked positive through just 10 games. But then yet again, he blew out his right meniscus and missed the entirety of that season as well. In 14-15, he managed to complete 51 regular season games, averaging a respectable 18 points, 3 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. But he wasn't the player he once was. In February of that year, the groin came again, and he complained of soreness. The team doctors confirmed that he needed another round of surgery to repair the tear in his right meniscus. He made it back into the lineup for the postseason, averaging an encouraging 21 points throughout, but was traded to the New York Knicks, which ended his tenure with Chicago. Before the injuries, Rose was one of the best players in the NBA, a great mid-range shooter with raw athleticism, possibly at the time the most athletic player in the NBA, and is the youngest player to ever win MVP, and he looked like he was going to be the next great guard for the Windy City. Over the years, he's shown flashes of himself, but the jury's still out on whether or not the former MVP will ever play a full season with the same reckless abandon that he played in those early years in Chicago. Number 2, Derrick Rose, on the players that never reached their pinnacle. Before we begin with the number 1 player on my list, let's look back at number 5, the great Bill Walton. Number 4, Penny Hardaway. Number 3, Grant Hill. And number 2, Derrick Rose. The last player on my list has a tragic story, and that is Len Bias. He was drafted 2nd overall by the Boston Celtics in 1986 and represented the future of this franchise. Bias at 6'8" could jump out of the gym. He was compared often to Michael Jordan during his college days at the University of Maryland, and he was going to take that torch from Larry Bird in Boston and become the next face of another Red Auerbach franchise. What happened next was beyond tragic. A cocaine overdose just 2 days after the draft, and just like that, Bias was gone, just 22 years old with a bright future that we never got to even see begin. And it's not just the Len Bias incident, but what the Len Bias situation meant for the Celtics. They were an aging team with an aging superstar in Larry Bird. Imagine if Len Bias could have came in and they could have had a couple years to rejuvenate Larry Bird, not put the same minutes that he was playing later on, and what that could have meant for his career in this overall dynasty of the Boston Celtics. So I think it really took them nearly 15 plus years to recover from what happened. It wasn't until 2008 that they put up their 18th and last NBA title. A bad decision. He could have been the next in line, a long line of Celtics greats. Instead, Len Bias goes down as one of the greatest players to never take the court. So there you have it, guys. My top 5 greatest players to never reach their pinnacle. It's been a great show today, as always. Let's root for me now. Let's go Heat. I need that date. Come on. Everyone likes to see a feel-good story, and this could be one. Love in COVID. So thank you guys for tuning in. As always, if you can, please go comment, like, react on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're all over. We appreciate it. It helps our brand as we continue to grow. Thank you to everyone again for listening, and to all a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.